19th, January 20th, 21st, 22nd, and 23rd of 2022. These were very intense days, the days of the March for Life and of the Walk for Life. Let me walk you through what I did each of these days. So Wednesday, January 19th, I was at my desk here very, very early, from about 4:30 or so, getting ready the final paperwork and plans for what I needed for the trip. At 7:30, I had a radio interview, and then right after that radio interview, got picked up to go to the Orlando airport. Both in the car at the airport and on the plane, I was constantly in communication with pro-life leaders and with my staff on email and doing other things in preparation for these eventful days. So several hours of work there while traveling. Then once I arrived in Washington, D.C., it was already early afternoon. I got my things settled into my room at the hotel, and we have a suite at the hotel each year for the March for Life where we receive leaders and have meetings. And so I met with our executive staff in the suite. They showed me that everything was prepared. I started networking with people in the lobby. This is one of my favorite things to do as people, pro-life activists from around the country were beginning to arrive in Washington. I was greeting them, saying hello to them, seeing our supporters from various places. And then I went right over to One America News Network for a 3 o'clock substantive interview in regard to the events of the March for Life and the prospect of Roe v. Wade being reversed this coming year. So I did that interview. After that, went back to the hotel, had dinner with my executive staff, and we, of course, went over final plans. And then from there, went over to Newsmax and was interviewed for the Greg Kelly report. I'm sure many of you watch Greg Kelly on Newsmax. And he talked to me also about the same things, the March for Life, the prospect of Roe v. Wade being reversed, and so forth. So that interview occurred there, and then after that interview, I was taken back to the hotel where I met with staff. We had a nighttime staff meeting to make sure that everyone had their assignments clear for the next few days. That was Wednesday, January the 19th. Thursday morning, January the 20th, got up early, got some final paperwork prepared in my room and on my computer, and then we, with several staff members, left the hotel, and despite the fact that it was cold rain, we went over to Planned Parenthood to lead the national protest and prayer vigil at Planned Parenthood from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. And during that time, therefore, I gave some remarks and led some prayers, and then I introduced various pro-life leaders who were there from around the country, representing a wide array of groups, and we did this for 2 hours, standing in front of that killing center, as women were being brought in, by the way, to have their babies killed. We finished that promptly at 11 o'clock, and right from Planned Parenthood, I went over to the studios of Steve Bannon with the War Room, and at 11:30, he did a substantial interview with me, also about the events of these days and the March for Life and the whole abortion issue. As soon as I got finished doing the interview with Steve Bannon, we drove through a McDonald's, got some lunch that I ate literally in the car on the way back to the hotel. And then at the hotel, I began networking with various people who were arriving from around the country. The Law of Life seminar started at 1 o'clock, and I gave the opening prayer for that right there at the Renaissance Hotel. Various pro-life leaders there listening to these various talks. After I opened up with the prayer there and did a little bit more networking, I went over to the offices of the America First Policy Institute for a 2 o'clock meeting with some key leaders there who had been working in the Trump administration, and we had a meeting about election integrity. Our associate Alveda King was there for that meeting as well. That was from 2 to 2:30. And then some of my staff picked me up there at that office, and we proceeded to the Basilica Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. And from 3 o'clock until 4:30, we had a wonderful 90-minute session of networking and greeting the people that were arriving for the big vigil mass for life. I took pictures with groups from different seminaries and campuses and youth groups. I met people who had me into their communities to speak 5, 10, 20, 30 years ago. I was with pro-life activists from every part of the country who were so happy to greet me and express their support for Priests for Life nonstop for 90 minutes there in the Basilica, down in the Crypt Church, and outside. Then at 4:30, we were picked up to be brought back over to the Supreme Court. On the way there, I led a national prayer call. I led off with prayer for the RNC. Republican National Committee Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel was on the line, together with people like Ralph Reed and many other prayer and faith leaders. So I led off with prayer on that call and with some remarks about the importance of the March for Life. As soon as I finished that call, I stepped out of the car and led a prayer in front of the Supreme Court at a prayer vigil that was being organized by our friends at Students for Life. They wanted me to say a special prayer asking for wisdom on the justices of the court as they decide the Dobbs case. And so I led that prayer, greeted people there at the court, and then as soon as that finished, I was taken at 5:45 over to Arlington to a Ruth's Chris steakhouse where there was a special dinner with Pastor Paula White. You may recognize her name as one of the key spiritual advisors for President Trump. We had a special dinner there. Alveda was there as well, and various other people who are connected with the Trump administration. And I spoke to them. I gave them a summary of what we do at Priests for Life. And then I had to leave that dinner a little bit early because then I had to go over to another dinner headed up by the Vans for Life organization out of San Antonio, Texas. They had a gigantic gala dinner at the Trump Hotel, and they asked me to say the final prayer for that banquet. Not only did I do that, but I was able to greet and network for a good long time the many, many, many people who were there, leaders and activists from all over the country. Then, after greeting all those people, I went back to our hotel, and we had another end-of-day meeting with our team and our staff so that we made sure that everyone was ready for their responsibilities the next day, the day of the March for Life. Got up the day of the March for Life nice and early, got together with our team, and we got into our vehicles and we went over to Constitution Hall, the site of the National Prayer Service that I'm privileged to lead every year. Got there about 6:30. At 6:35, I had a radio interview. And then, starting at 7, people began arriving for the Mass and the prayer service. Bishop Joseph Coffey did the Mass. I was preparing the speakers and the clergy for the interdenominational service, which started promptly at 8:30, at which I preached the sermon, and during which I gave out the pro-life awards to legislators from Texas and Mississippi, thanking them for the great pro-life laws that they have passed. We did a very successful service, finished right at 10 o'clock, at which point I jumped into our vehicle together with Janet Morana, our executive director, with Janet Porter, one of the awardees, and with several others, and we drove to the entrance point for the March for Life rally at the VIP tent for pro-life leaders. Janet went to do an interview with EWTN. I did several interviews as well at the media tent near the rally site. And then we had the rally itself. Meanwhile, I was networking and interacting with the various pro-life leaders who were there. The March for Life rally concluded. I went to the front of the march to march with Jeannie Mancini, the president of March for Life, with various bishops and other pro-life leaders, and had a wonderful, joyful March for Life up Constitution Avenue, greeting people along the way, interacting with the students who were carrying the banner and the flags. It was marvelous. Then we got right up to the Supreme Court. As soon as we reached the Supreme Court, it was about 2:30. And right on schedule, we started the Silent No More gathering. I addressed the crowd that was gathered there in front of the Supreme Court, led the opening prayer. Together with Janet Morana, we began having the testimonies of the people who have had abortions. And we had one testimony after another. Meanwhile, I broke away from there a little bit, and as I do every year, I stood on the curb of the street as people were coming by, marching for life, and again, greeting folks from communities far and wide who have had me in to speak over the years, and greeted them, gave them my encouragement, and that was a beautiful thing. Then I had to walk over to our office, which is right behind the Supreme Court. Priests for Life has an office. I met up with our associate Brian Kemper there, and we drove to the airport. When I got to the airport, I checked in for our flight to San Francisco, where the Walk for Life was being held the next day. While there in the airport, just after checking in, I did another radio interview about the events of the day, and then Brian and I flew across the country, landed in San Francisco, checked into our hotel, and went to bed. The next morning, Saturday, January 22nd, the actual anniversary of Roe v. Wade, was the Walk for Life in San Francisco that we helped to lead in various ways. Started out by going with Brian to the Planned Parenthood in San Francisco. Together with pro-life activists from around the country, I led off the prayerful protest. I said some words, said a prayer, and began that event. From there, I went over to St. Mary's Cathedral, the Cathedral of the Archdiocese of San Francisco. And as I do each year, I was out on the main plaza greeting people as they arrived. The parochial vicar there, the priest assigned to the cathedral, welcomed me, and one of the Knights of Columbus stayed with me in case I needed any assistance. But I greeted, again, groups and seminarians and pro-life activist groups and youth groups. We took pictures. It was wonderful. Did that for about an hour and a half. And then went over at 9:30 rather, to the Civic Center Plaza, where the people were beginning to gather for the Walk for Life. I did some interviews, different outlets that wanted to interview me. I did some broadcasting myself to our channels, and then I led off the Silent No More gathering. Again, we had moms there testifying about their abortion experience. I spoke to the crowd, introduced these ladies, and then gave more remarks to the crowd as the crowd began to grow in preparation for the main rally for the Walk for Life, which started at 12:30, and I gave the opening prayer for the main rally, addressing the crowd there and also the viewers on EWTN and many other media outlets that were covering it. And then I went with the leaders of the walk to the front of the walk, and we kicked it off through the streets of San Francisco. Had a beautiful walk, walked for a while with Archbishop Cordileone, the Archbishop of San Francisco, whom I've known for a very long time, from before he became a bishop. And then when we got to the concluding point, I again stood at a point where everyone that was coming on the walk was able to see me, and for another hour and a half greeted people who were just so delighted to be there and who are such strong supporters of Priests for Life. And we took photos, and I gave blessings, and we had conversations. It was nonstop. It was so, and some of you were there, one after another for 90 minutes, and I just was so energized by that. As soon as that was finished, Brian and I went back to the hotel, and we got ready for a leaders' dinner. So what I did was I made a couple of phone calls, checked in with my staff back in Washington, made sure everything was going well there, because they were leading a prayer vigil at the Supreme Court while we were doing the Walk for Life in San Francisco. Janet and others were leading a prayer vigil at the Supreme Court. So I checked in with them, and then we went to Sausalito, and we had a pro-life leaders dinner with all the organizers of the Walk for Life and various other national leaders who had flown in for the event. Was at table with Archbishop Cordileone and Dolores Meehan, the co-founder of the Walk for Life. We had a great dinner together, a couple of dozen leaders, and then back to the hotel for a good night's sleep. The next day, Sunday, the 23rd, was basically a day in the airplane. I got up, had breakfast with Brian at the airport, and flew back to Orlando. When I got back here in Orlando, I settled in here to my office, did a little bit of work, but had a quick dinner, And then I was ready to go to sleep. So I had a good restful sleep Sunday night. So those were my activities during the March for Life and the Walk for Life. Thank you, so many of you who were there that I got to greet personally. And the work has only just begun. We have much to do and great victories ahead. So thanks for watching.